He hid a giant Apache woman for 20 years, until he discovered why she trembled before us. The wind blew harshly across the wide, dusty plains of Arizona, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. On the outskirts of a small town, Thomas, a quiet rancher, sat on the porch of his modest wooden house. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and listened to the gentle creaking of the old porch swing. Life had always been simple for Thomas. He woke early, tended to his cattle, repaired fences, and spent evenings reading by the fire. But tonight felt different. A strange feeling had settled in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and unease that he couldn't explain. It was during this restless evening that Thomas first noticed something moving in the shadows near the edge of his property. At first he thought it was a coyote or a wandering dog, but the shape moved with a strange, human-like rhythm. Curiosity pushed him forward, and he slowly walked toward the edge of the clearing, his boots crunching on the dry dirt. There, standing under the faint light of the moon, was a woman unlike any he had ever seen. She was tall, far taller than any human he had known, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to fill the entire space around her. Her eyes were wide and alert, reflecting the moonlight with an intensity that made Thomas step back slightly. There was fear there, but also something else, a quiet strength, a determination that seemed impossible to hide. She carried herself with a careful grace, as though every movement had been measured and practiced for survival. Thomas could see the signs of a hard life etched into her face, the lines of worry, the shadows under her eyes, and the scars that told silent stories of battles fought and pain endured. The townspeople had always whispered about dangers beyond the plains, about travelers who vanished and strange occurrences in the desert. Thomas had always dismissed those stories as exaggeration. But now, standing before him, was a living mystery that seemed to embody all those rumors. He wanted to speak, to ask her who she was and where she had come from, but words caught in his throat. She did not move closer. Instead, she crouched slightly, a silent gesture that made Thomas realize she was as afraid of him as he was intrigued by her. After what felt like hours, she finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "Please, I mean no harm." Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. There was a strange melody to her voice, a combination of softness and strength that made him want to protect her immediately. Despite not knowing her story or her name, he felt a responsibility to help her. Something about her presence demanded care, and his heart, which had known years of solitude, stirred with an unfamiliar warmth. Thomas knew the townspeople would not understand. They were suspicious, often quick to judge what they did not know. A woman of her size and appearance would only be met with fear or curiosity, perhaps even cruelty. And so, without fully thinking it through, he motioned for her to follow him to the safety of his small ranch. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the dark desert beyond, as if weighing the dangers of leaving the unknown for a stranger's offer of safety. Finally, she nodded, stepping lightly, almost silently, across the dirt toward him. The walk back to his house was quiet except for the soft crunching of their footsteps on the hard earth. Thomas noticed the way her large hands moved cautiously, how her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, and he realized she had spent much of her life hiding, always aware of threats no one else might see. By the time they reached the small cabin, the sky had turned a deep indigo, and the first stars began to twinkle. Thomas opened the door and gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside, her height making the ceiling seem almost too low, and she looked around with a mix of curiosity and caution. Thomas offered her a seat by the fire, which he had already prepared with dry wood and kindling. She accepted, her long legs folded carefully beneath her, and Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders slowly easing as the warmth from the fire reached her. He poured her a cup of water and handed it to her. Her fingers, large and strong, wrapped around the cup delicately, and she drank slowly, as if savoring every drop. There was a humility in her actions that reminded Thomas of the fragility hidden behind her towering frame. As the fire crackled, Thomas finally found his voice. "You must be hungry. I can make you something to eat." She shook her head gently, her long dark hair falling over her face. "Not yet. I need to rest first." He understood. Whoever she was, whatever she had been through, her body carried the weight of a life filled with struggle. He decided not to press her. Instead, he fetched a blanket and helped her settle on a simple cot he had in the corner. She accepted the comfort with a soft nod, and for the first time, Thomas saw a flicker of relief cross her face. Night deepened, and the desert outside was alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. Thomas sat in his chair, watching her sleep. He realized how rare it was to encounter someone so profoundly different, yet somehow entirely human in her fears, her strength, and her silence. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had she appeared at his doorstep? But more importantly, he felt a growing certainty that he could not turn her away. This woman, this giant stranger, needed him, and he would not abandon her. In the days that followed, Thomas learned small things about her without ever demanding answers. He noticed how she moved, careful not to startle the animals, how she observed the land with a quiet awareness, and how she flinched at sudden noises as if danger could arrive at any moment. Slowly, a routine formed. She helped him with chores that her strength made easier, lifting heavy logs or clearing stones from the field. In return, Thomas provided food, clothing, and above all, a sense of safety. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and simple words. It was a fragile language, but one built on trust and necessity. The townspeople began to whisper about Thomas and his unusual visitor. Some laughed, some gossiped, and some simply shook their heads. They could not imagine why a man would shelter such a stranger, and Thomas did not try to explain. He knew their curiosity could not compare to the bond forming in the quiet spaces of his ranch. Every day, he saw her relax a little more, though the haunted look in her eyes never fully disappeared. There were moments when she stared into the distance, trembling slightly, as if memories of a life long past had returned to her. Thomas did not ask what she saw. He only offered his silent presence as reassurance. Over time, Thomas realized that this woman, who towered over everyone else in appearance, was also incredibly fragile in ways that only he could see. She had lived through unimaginable hardships and had learned to rely only on herself. Now, she had someone she could trust completely. Thomas understood that her visit to his ranch was no accident. It was fate, an encounter meant to bring two lost souls together in a world that often overlooked those who were different. As the sun rose each morning, casting golden light across the dusty plains, Thomas would watch her from the porch, sometimes smiling at the small, human moments she allowed herself. A laugh at a bird, a careful touch on a calf, or the way she studied the clouds. She was mysterious, magnificent, and wounded, all at once. And Thomas knew that their story, which had begun on a stormy night, was only just starting. The first part of their journey had ended with the stranger finding shelter, but it was clear that much lay ahead. The woman's past, full of pain and secrets, would one day surface, and Thomas would have to face it with her. For now, though, he was content to offer her safety, and she, in turn, seemed to accept it with cautious gratitude. In the quiet desert, amidst the endless horizon and whispering wind, a new life had begun, one that neither Thomas nor the giant woman could have imagined, yet both would shape together in ways that would leave an indelible mark on their hearts forever. Life on the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm, though it was far from ordinary. The giant Apache woman, whose name Thomas still did not know, began to make herself at home, though always with careful boundaries. She spent her mornings helping Thomas with chores, her long, strong arms effortlessly lifting bundles of firewood or moving stubborn rocks from the fields. Watching her, Thomas realized just how much strength and skill she carried, honed over years of surviving in a harsh world. Every task she performed seemed to combine power and grace, a reminder that she had once lived a life where strength meant survival. Though she helped with work, she avoided the town and the people who lived there. Thomas respected her choice. He understood that she was more than just wary. She was cautious because the world had hurt her before. She had a way of observing everything around her, noting the smallest sounds, movements, or changes in the air. Sometimes she would pause mid-task, staring into the distance, as if listening to things that Thomas could not hear. He often wondered what memories lingered in her mind, but he never pressed her. Trust, he had learned, could not be forced. It had to grow slowly. Evenings were the quietest part of their day. The two would sit by the fire after the chores were done, Thomas with his cup of coffee, and the woman often silently watching the flames. Occasionally, she would reach out to adjust the logs or trace patterns in the ashes with her long fingers. Thomas noticed that she rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. When she did, her words were measured and thoughtful, revealing glimpses of intelligence, experience, and sensitivity that no one in the town could have imagined. Despite her silence, Thomas could feel her gratitude in small gestures, the way she offered him the first piece of bread she had baked, or the soft smile that appeared when he praised her efforts. These small acts told him more than words ever could. He also began noticing the moments when her body would tremble, often triggered by sudden noises or unexpected movements. It wasn't just fear, it was memory, a reflex from a life filled with uncertainty and danger. Thomas could not help but wonder what she had endured to develop such instincts, and he felt an increasing responsibility to ensure she never had to experience that pain again. As days turned into weeks, the woman grew more comfortable with Thomas and the routines of the ranch. She learned the rhythms of the animals, the cows, the chickens, and even the horses. The giant size that might have seemed intimidating to others became a blessing on the ranch. She could lift heavy sacks of feed with ease, mend fences faster than anyone else, and even guide stubborn animals with a gentle authority. Thomas marveled at how seamlessly she adapted, despite having lived so much of her life in hiding. Her strength was not only physical but also quiet and enduring, a testament to the resilience that had allowed her to survive. Even with the hard work, there were moments of joy. They would sometimes watch the sunsets together, the vast plains stretching endlessly before them. She would tilt her head to the sky, tracing the patterns of clouds, or point out a hawk circling high above, its shadow moving across the dry earth. Thomas found these moments peaceful, a reminder that even in a life shaped by fear and isolation, there was beauty to be found. Slowly, he began to see the woman not only as a mystery to be protected, but also as a person whose presence added depth and meaning to his own life. Yet, there were days when her past would intrude upon the calm. Occasionally, she would flinch at the sight of strangers passing by the edge of the property, or her hands would tremble, as if recalling a memory too painful to speak aloud. Thomas noticed that she never spoke of those moments. She simply moved on as best she could, keeping the past locked away. He respected this silence, knowing that healing takes time and patience. Over time, he began to see that her fear was not just of strangers, but of the world itself, a world that had forced her to hide for so many years. One morning, while tending to the horses, Thomas asked gently, "Do you want to go into town sometime?" She paused, studying his face carefully. Then she shook her head. "Not yet," she replied softly. The words were simple, but they carried a weight of honesty and self-awareness. Thomas understood. She needed time, and he had no intention of rushing her. He realized that the ranch had become her sanctuary, a place where she could live freely without fear, and he felt a quiet pride in being able to provide that safety. In the evenings, when the chores were finished and the fire burned low, Thomas sometimes noticed her humming quietly. The sound was soft, almost like a lullaby, and it filled the cabin with a sense of calm. It was rare for her to show emotion so openly, and Thomas treasured those moments, understanding that they represented a trust slowly being built between them. He also began leaving small gifts for her, freshly picked fruits, a blanket he had sewn himself, or a book with pictures of faraway lands. She would accept them with a quiet nod or a gentle smile, and he saw in those gestures that she appreciated not only the items but the thought behind them. Though she rarely spoke of her past, Thomas could see traces of it in the way she moved, in the careful way she approached tasks, and in the vigilance that never fully left her. He realized that her life before the ranch had been filled with challenges he could barely imagine, and that the isolation she had endured was a defense mechanism. Over time, he came to admire her courage. She had survived, not just because of strength, but because of patience, intelligence, and an unyielding will to live. That resilience made Thomas more determined than ever to protect her and provide a life where fear no longer ruled her days. Life continued in this quiet, steady rhythm, punctuated by small adventures and shared moments of understanding. Thomas often found himself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought this extraordinary woman into his life. He thought about the loneliness he had known before her arrival, the simplicity of his days, and the sudden depth that her presence had added. She had transformed the ranch in ways that went far beyond helping with chores. She had brought companionship, a sense of purpose, and a reminder that even in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, kindness and trust could create something rare and beautiful. There were, of course, challenges. Sometimes she would become startled by loud noises, sudden movements, or unexpected encounters with wildlife. On those days, Thomas would gently guide her, offering comfort and reassurance. Over time, these incidents became less frequent, though the memory of them never fully disappeared. He understood that her life before the ranch had required constant vigilance, and that unlearning such habits would take time, patience, and care. Despite the challenges, the bond between Thomas and the woman grew stronger each day. They communicated in ways beyond words, through gestures, shared work, and quiet presence. He learned to recognize her moods, her subtle signals, and the moments when she needed space or support. In return, she began to trust him more deeply, allowing herself small comforts, tentative smiles, and even laughter. It was a fragile trust, built slowly over days and months, but it was genuine and strong. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, Thomas realized how extraordinary their relationship had become. Here was a woman who had lived a life of hardship, fear, and solitude, and yet she had allowed him to be part of her world. She had taught him lessons of patience, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving against the odds. He felt privileged to share this time with her, and he knew that the story of the giant Apache woman was far from over. The days blended into weeks and the weeks into months. Each day brought small victories, quiet moments of connection, and a growing sense of safety. Thomas learned to anticipate her needs, to respect her boundaries, and to celebrate her strengths. She, in turn, learned to trust him, to find comfort in his presence, and to begin the slow process of healing from a life filled with fear and uncertainty. The ranch, once a simple home for a solitary man, had become a sanctuary for two lost souls who had found each other in a world that often misunderstood them. And though the past still lingered in her eyes and the tremble in her hands, Thomas knew that the most important thing he could give her was safety, patience, and a chance to live freely. The giant Apache woman, who had arrived one stormy night like a shadow of mystery, was slowly learning that not all humans brought danger. Some brought trust, care, and the possibility of a new life, a life where she could finally breathe without fear, and perhaps, one day find peace. The seasons began to change on the ranch, shifting slowly from the dry heat of summer to the crisp, cool air of autumn. The mornings became misty, and the fields glimmered with dew as the sun rose. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, but Thomas began to notice something new about the giant Apache woman. While she had grown more comfortable with him and the ranch, there were moments when her calm exterior faltered. Her hands would tremble, her eyes would widen, and she would seem to shrink into herself as though recalling something she desperately wished to forget. Thomas watched these moments with growing concern. He did not push her to speak, knowing that the past was her own to reveal when she was ready. Instead, he offered quiet support, an understanding glance, a gentle touch on her shoulder, or simply sitting near her without saying a word. Over time, he realized that her trembling was more than just fear of the unknown. It was memory. Something deep, powerful, and painful from her past haunted her still. One day, while repairing a fence together, a sudden noise startled a flock of birds into the sky. The woman froze mid-step, her body shaking, and Thomas immediately went to her side. He placed a hand on her arm, grounding her, and spoke softly. "It's okay. They won't hurt you." She blinked, looked at him, and exhaled slowly, trying to calm herself. I thought they were coming for me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Thomas felt a pang in his heart. Whatever had happened to her before, it was clear that she had been hunted, forced to live in constant alertness. As the weeks passed, Thomas continued to observe her carefully. He noticed the way she flinched at sudden movements or loud voices, the way she kept her distance from strangers, and the meticulous care she took in every action. Even in moments of work or leisure, there was always an underlying tension. He began to understand that her life before the ranch had not been easy. She had learned to survive through vigilance, strength, and caution. Now, in the safety of the ranch, these instincts remained, a shadow of the dangers she had once faced. Thomas's curiosity grew, but he tempered it with patience. He knew that asking too many questions too soon could break the trust they had built. Instead, he allowed her to reveal small pieces of her story through gestures, drawings, and careful words. Slowly, fragments emerged. He learned that she had once lived in a village that had been destroyed, that she had lost family and friends, and that there were men who had sought to capture or harm her. Each fragment was a window into a life filled with loss and resilience, and Thomas could see why she trembled when confronted with sudden reminders of the past. One quiet evening, Thomas decided to try a different approach. Instead of asking her to talk, he began sharing stories of his own life, small memories from his childhood, tales of the ranch, and moments of joy he had experienced. He spoke slowly and warmly, hoping that by opening a part of himself, she might feel safe enough to share a part of her own history. At first, she listened silently, her eyes focused on the fire, but gradually she began to respond. A nod here, a soft murmur there. Then one night she began to draw in the dirt near the fire. The drawings were simple, yet powerful. They showed figures of people, homes, and landscapes, some familiar and some strange. One drawing depicted a village engulfed in flames, and Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. She traced the shapes of people running, figures disappearing into smoke, and then a single figure standing tall, alone, amidst the chaos. He realized that this was her story, her memories of survival, captured in simple, quiet lines. She did not need words to tell him what had happened. The drawings spoke volumes. As Thomas sat quietly, he felt a deeper understanding forming between them. He began to see that her trembling was not weakness. It was memory, a reminder of the life she had endured and the dangers she had survived. She had learned to hide, to protect herself, and to rely on strength and vigilance to survive. And now, in the safety of the ranch, she was slowly learning that not all humans posed a threat. Thomas understood that his role was not just to provide food and shelter, but to offer trust, patience, and a place where she could begin to heal. In the following weeks, Thomas noticed small changes. The trembles became less frequent, the flinches less severe, and she began to approach tasks with a little more confidence. She started to speak more often, using simple words to describe her feelings or memories. One afternoon, while tending to the horses, she paused and said, "I used to ride horses like these when I was younger." Her voice carried a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. Thomas nodded, encouraging her to continue, but she simply smiled softly and moved on to her work. That small moment, however, marked a step forward. She was beginning to trust him with fragments of her past. Thomas also observed the ways she coped with memories. Sometimes she would hum quietly, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to calm her mind. Other times she would pace the edges of the ranch, as if walking out the tension and fear that lingered inside her. He respected these rituals, never interfering, understanding that they were her methods of survival and healing. Slowly he realized that the woman's past, though painful, had also made her incredibly resilient, resourceful, and aware of the world in ways most people could not imagine. One evening, a storm rolled in, dark clouds covering the sky and lightning flashing across the plains. Thomas watched as the woman sat near the fire, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. He noticed her hands trembling more than usual, and he knelt beside her. "The storm will pass," he said gently. She looked at him and nodded, her lips pressed together. "Ice storms remind me of the raids," she whispered. Thomas felt a chill. He did not press her for details, but he understood that the tremble was not just fear of the storm. It was a reminder of a time when life had been dangerous and uncertain. He held her hand briefly, a silent promise that she was safe now. As the months passed, their bond deepened. Thomas learned to recognize the subtle cues that indicated fear, discomfort, or anxiety, and he adapted his actions to make her feel secure. In return, she began to show him moments of joy and trust. She would laugh softly at small jokes, offer assistance without prompting, and even share stories of her childhood in fragments. Though incomplete, these glimpses into her life revealed a person of intelligence, courage, and depth, someone who had survived unimaginable hardships yet retained the capacity for trust and connection. Despite the progress, there were setbacks. On some days, the trembles would return, sudden and unexpected, triggered by a sound, a shadow, or a memory. Thomas learned not to be frustrated by these moments but to approach them with understanding and patience. He realized that healing from a lifetime of fear and isolation was not linear. It required kindness, consistency, and unwavering support. And he was willing to provide all of it, knowing that the woman's trust and safety were far more important than anything else. In quiet moments, Thomas often reflected on the woman's strength. She had lived through events that most could not imagine, and yet she had survived, carrying her memories like invisible armor. He marveled at the resilience that had allowed her to endure hardships, escape danger, and remain standing despite the odds. That resilience, combined with her intelligence and care, made her extraordinary. He felt privileged to witness it and honored to play a role in helping her live a life where fear no longer ruled. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of the fence, she paused and looked toward the distant hills. "I remember my village," she said softly, her voice carrying both sorrow and wonder. "It was peaceful once until everything changed." Thomas nodded, offering no judgment, only presence. She did not elaborate, but he understood that she was beginning to share pieces of her past in her own way. Each word, each memory, was a step forward in trust, and he felt a profound respect for her courage. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Thomas realized how far they had come. The woman who had arrived in fear and silence was slowly learning that the world could be safe, that trust could be given, and that she could live without constant vigilance. He knew the journey was far from over, that more stories, memories, and fears would surface, but he also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. The giant Apache woman, once trembling at the thought of the world outside, was beginning to find peace within the boundaries of the ranch. Thomas had learned that her past was not something to erase or ignore, but something to honor, respect, and approach with care. Each day brought a delicate balance of patience, understanding, and quiet support. And in those small moments, amidst the chores, the sunsets, and the gentle hum of the desert, a fragile yet powerful trust was forming, one that would carry them forward through the challenges and discoveries yet to come. Time on the ranch had grown into a gentle rhythm, yet, beneath the surface, a storm of memories quietly stirred within the giant Apache woman. Though she had grown more comfortable with Thomas and the routine of ranch life, there were moments when shadows from her past seemed to creep back into the present. It was as if unseen hands from decades ago reached across time to remind her of what she had endured. Thomas noticed these moments, subtle at first, her fingers trembling as she sorted grain, her eyes darting toward the horizon, and a soft shiver that traveled through her massive frame. It was during one late afternoon, while Thomas was mending the roof of the barn, that the past fully revealed itself. A group of travelers had stopped at the edge of the property, seeking water and shelter for the night. The woman, seeing them, froze in place, her entire body rigid. Her eyes widened, and she took a small, shuffling step backward, as though retreating from a danger only she could see. Thomas immediately descended the ladder and approached her, sensing the tension that radiated from her. "They're just travelers," he said softly, keeping his voice calm and even. "They won't hurt you." But she shook her head, her hands pressed to her chest. I can't," she whispered, trembling violently. "I can't face them." Thomas realized in that moment that her fear went beyond mere caution. It was rooted in the deepest layers of memory. She had survived by hiding, by being unseen, by avoiding those who might seek to harm her. And now, confronted with the sight of strangers, that survival instinct had returned with full force. He guided her to the barn, speaking in quiet, steady tones. "You're safe here. Nobody will touch you. I promise." She leaned against the wall, shaking and trembling, her breaths coming in short, uneven gasps. Thomas knelt beside her, holding her hands in his. "It's all right," he said. "I'm here. You're not alone anymore." Slowly, her trembles began to lessen, but Thomas could see the lingering fear in her eyes, a reflection of decades of danger, loss, and trauma. Once the travelers were settled and out of sight, Thomas sat with her in silence, letting the moment pass without words. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "They came to take me," she said. "I was just a girl, and they tried to take me from my village. I ran, I hid, I survived." Her words were sparse, halting, yet each carried the weight of a lifetime of fear and resilience. Thomas listened, his heart heavy with the realization of what she had endured. He had known she had a past, but hearing fragments of it for the first time made the danger she had lived through painfully real. She continued, her voice trembling but growing steadier with each word. "I watched them burn the homes, take the children, the ones who stayed, they didn't survive. I had to hide in the woods, in caves. I learned to be quiet, to move without being seen. I could not trust anyone, not even my own people sometimes, because the world had turned cruel." Her hands shook as she spoke, but Thomas did not pull away. He held them gently, offering support through presence rather than words. Thomas realized that her trembling was more than fear. It was a reflex embedded deeply into her being. Every sudden noise, every unfamiliar movement triggered a memory of danger long past. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. And yet, even as she spoke of pain, Thomas could see strength in her eyes, a resilience forged through years of survival and endurance. He felt immense respect for her, not pity. This was a woman who had faced unimaginable hardship and had lived, despite everything. Over the next few days, Thomas allowed her to rest and recover, giving her space to process the emotions that had surfaced. He noticed that her trembles gradually became less frequent, though the memory of fear still lingered in her eyes. In quiet moments, she would trace patterns in the dirt, hum softly, or stare into the horizon, lost in thought. Thomas understood that healing was not linear. It could not be rushed. All he could do was provide safety, patience, and unwavering presence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, she finally shared more of her story. She told Thomas about the village she had once called home, describing the tall wooden homes, the flowing river, and the laughter of children. She spoke of festivals, songs, and dances under the full moon. And then her voice faltered as she recounted the attack, the night when strangers had destroyed everything she loved. Thomas listened, silent and attentive, his heart aching for the life she had lost. Through her words, Thomas began to understand why she had trembled for so many years. It was not simply fear of strangers or the unknown. It was the memory of a world that had tried to take everything from her, leaving her alone, hiding, and constantly vigilant. Her fear was a survival mechanism, one that had kept her alive for decades. And now, in the safety of the ranch, that mechanism was slowly learning to relax, though the scars remained. Despite the heavy memories, there were moments of light. She spoke of the people who had shown her kindness, those rare individuals who had helped her when she was young and vulnerable. She remembered simple acts, a warm meal, a quiet place to rest, a hand extended in trust. Thomas realized that these memories of kindness had helped shape her resilience, teaching her that even in a cruel world, some humans could be trusted. He hoped that their life together on the ranch would add to those memories, showing her that trust and safety could exist beyond fleeting moments. In the weeks that followed, Thomas noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She began to venture further from the barn, exploring the ranch with cautious curiosity. She interacted with the animals more confidently, and even allowed him to introduce small, safe interactions with travelers passing near the property. Each step was a test of trust, and each success marked a small victory for both of them. Thomas felt proud, not because he had achieved anything, but because she was learning to reclaim parts of herself that had been lost to fear. One afternoon, while working in the garden, she paused and looked at Thomas with a soft, almost shy expression. I feel safer," she said quietly. "I never thought I could feel this way again." Thomas smiled, his chest warming with quiet relief. "I'm glad," he replied. "You are safe here always. That will never change." She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. In that moment, Thomas realized that their bond was not just about protection. It was about healing, trust, and shared humanity. The giant Apache woman, who had trembled for decades at the sight of strangers, was slowly discovering that the world could hold safety, kindness, and compassion. Thomas understood that her journey was far from over. There would be days when fear returned, moments when the past would intrude, and times when trust had to be rebuilt. But he also knew that together, they could face these challenges. He had witnessed her courage, resilience, and intelligence firsthand, and he had no doubt that she could overcome the lingering shadows of her past. Nightfall brought quiet reflection. The two would sit by the fire, Thomas reading aloud from a small book or telling stories of his own childhood. She would listen intently, sometimes responding with a soft comment, sometimes simply watching the flames dance. In these moments, the past and present coexisted, the memory of fear and loss alongside the growing sense of trust and safety. Thomas realized that his role was not to erase her history but to honor it, support her, and help her find a life where trembling no longer dictated every moment. And then, one evening, something extraordinary happened. She stood before him, taller than ever, yet with a gentleness that made her presence comforting rather than intimidating. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held clarity. She spoke of her past openly, describing the events that had shaped her, the fears that had lingered, and the resilience that had carried her through decades of hiding. Thomas listened, his heart full of admiration and respect. For the first time, he saw her trembling not as a sign of weakness, but as a testament to the life she had survived. Thomas knew that this revelation marked a turning point. The woman who had arrived on his doorstep 20 years earlier, silent and wary, had grown into someone capable of facing her past, at least in small steps. Her trembles, once uncontrollable and overwhelming, were now understood, both by her and by him. He realized that the journey of trust and healing was ongoing, and that the bond they shared had become a source of strength for both of them. The giant Apache woman, once hidden from the world, had begun to reclaim her life. The trembles that had defined so much of her existence were no longer simply reactions to fear. They were reminders of the resilience, courage, and survival that had allowed her to endure. Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that he could be part of her journey, providing safety, understanding, and the chance to live a life where the past no longer held power over her. And so, the ranch became a sanctuary not only of safety, but of healing. The two lived side by side, their days filled with work, quiet moments of connection, and small victories over the lingering shadows of fear. Each day brought new challenges, new discoveries, and new steps toward freedom from the past. Together, they were not just surviving, they were thriving, learning that trust, patience, and compassion could transform even the deepest wounds. Time on the ranch had moved slowly, yet every day brought change, small but powerful. The giant Apache woman, who had arrived in fear and silence years ago, had begun to discover a new life. A life where she could breathe without constant vigilance, where she could move without trembling, and where trust no longer felt like a dangerous gamble. Thomas had become more than a protector. He was a companion, a friend, and someone she could rely on completely. The bond between them was now deeper than either had imagined possible, forged in patience, understanding, and shared survival. With the arrival of spring, the desert landscape transformed. Wildflowers bloomed across the plains, turning the dry land into a canvas of colors. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of earth and blossoms, and even the animals seemed to sense the change. The Apache woman began to venture further from the cabin, exploring the land with cautious curiosity. She would touch the petals of flowers, kneel to watch insects crawl, and sometimes stand on a hilltop, arms outstretched, as if embracing the vastness of the world. Each day she discovered more of the beauty she had been denied for so long, and Thomas watched with quiet admiration. One afternoon, a traveler passed near the ranch, seeking directions to a nearby town. Thomas introduced the traveler, explaining that she was safe and trusted. The woman hesitated at first, her body tense, and Thomas could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. But instead of recoiling, she stepped forward slowly, extending her hand in greeting. The traveler, surprised but respectful, accepted the gesture, and a smile broke across her face. Thomas felt a surge of pride and relief. This small moment represented a giant step forward, a sign that she was no longer bound by the fear that had haunted her for decades. As days turned into weeks, she began participating more in the life of the ranch. She helped plant crops, tended to the animals, and even learned to bake bread, her large hands handling the dough with surprising delicacy. Each task she performed showcased not only her strength, but also her grace, a combination of power and care that Thomas had come to deeply respect. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a home, a space where she could contribute, create, and exist fully without fear. Over time, Thomas introduced her to some trusted neighbors, people who had shown kindness in the past. At first, she observed quietly, keeping her distance, but gradually she allowed herself to engage. Her deep, gentle voice, once hesitant and soft, began to speak with confidence. She told small stories of the ranch, shared simple wisdom about the animals, and even laughed at moments of humor. The neighbors, initially wary of her size and presence, soon grew to admire her strength, intelligence, and calm demeanor. It became clear that she was no longer a figure to be feared, but someone who could inspire respect and trust. Despite these changes, Thomas remained aware that her past would always be a part of her. There were still moments when a sudden noise or an unexpected movement would make her flinch, when memories of danger returned uninvited. Yet these moments became less frequent, and each one was met with support and understanding. Thomas never rushed her, never judged her reactions. He had learned that patience was the most powerful tool in helping her heal, and that respect for her experiences was more important than any attempt to erase them. One day, as they worked together in the garden, she spoke of her village again. This time, however, her voice carried no fear, only a quiet remembrance. She described the people she had loved, the celebrations, the songs, and the laughter. Thomas listened intently, realizing that by speaking these memories aloud, she was reclaiming them from the shadows of pain. Her stories became a bridge between the past and present, connecting her survival with the life she was now building on the ranch. It was a reminder that memory could be both painful and empowering, and that sharing it could be a source of strength. As the months passed, she began to take pride in her abilities and her role in the community. She repaired fences with skill, taught Thomas new ways to tend the land, and even offered guidance to neighbors seeking help with animals or crops. Her confidence grew, matched by a quiet sense of self-assurance. Thomas watched her, amazed at how much she had changed since the day she first appeared at his doorstep. She had transformed from a frightened, silent figure into a woman capable of facing the world with dignity, strength, and trust. The people of the town began to see her not as a curiosity or a threat, but as a remarkable individual with wisdom and strength. Children would sometimes come to watch her work, fascinated by her height and skill, and she would smile gently, showing kindness and patience. Adults, too, began to respect her, seeking her advice or assistance when needed. Thomas realized that the woman who had once hidden from the world was now becoming an integral part of it, not through force or assertion, but through trust, kindness, and competence. As spring gave way to summer, a sense of completeness began to settle over the ranch. The giant Apache woman who had spent decades in fear and hiding was now thriving. Her laughter, once rare, became more frequent. Her movements, once cautious, now carried confidence. And her eyes, once clouded with fear, now held clarity and warmth. Thomas felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had played a part in her journey, but also recognizing that her courage, resilience, and determination had been the driving forces all along. One evening, under a sky filled with stars, she turned to Thomas and spoke softly. "I feel free," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I have learned that I can live without fear, that I can trust, that I can belong." Thomas smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. "You are free," he replied, "and you always will be." She nodded, looking out across the plains, a sense of calm washing over her. In that moment, the years of trembling, hiding, and fear seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet joy and acceptance of the life she had fought so hard to survive. Together, they watched the sunrise, a symbol of new beginnings. The ranch, once a place of solitude and work, had become a sanctuary, a space of healing, trust, and belonging. The woman had discovered that even after years of fear and isolation, it was possible to live fully, to find safety, and to embrace a world that once seemed dangerous and cruel. Thomas felt honored to witness her journey, knowing that her strength and resilience had brought them both to a place of peace and understanding. In the months that followed, the woman continued to grow, not only in confidence but in connection to the world around her. She tended to the animals with skill and compassion, cared for the land with attention and patience, and offered guidance to neighbors with wisdom and generosity. Her presence brought balance to the ranch, and her story became a quiet inspiration to all who knew her. She had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of those around her, proving that trust, patience, and kindness could overcome fear and isolation. Thomas often reflected on the journey they had shared. He remembered the night she first arrived, trembling and silent, and compared it to the woman who now walked the ranch with dignity and confidence. He realized that the story was not only hers but theirs, a tale of trust, compassion, and the power of human connection. Through patience, understanding, and unwavering care, they had created a life that honored the past while embracing the future. And so, the giant Apache woman who had once hidden from the world for decades found her place. She had learned to trust, to live without fear, and to embrace the world with strength and grace. Thomas, too, had grown, learning the power of patience, empathy, and the profound impact of offering safety and trust to someone in need. Together, they had built a life where the past no longer held power over the present, where fear was replaced by courage, and where the bonds of trust and compassion created a sanctuary that would last for years to come. In the end, the ranch was more than a home. It was a testament to resilience, healing, and the enduring power of human kindness. The giant Apache woman, once trembling before the world, now walked with confidence, her spirit free and her heart at peace. Thomas knew that their story was one of many lessons, that trust, patience, and understanding could transform lives, and that even after years of fear and isolation, it was always possible to find safety, belonging, and hope. And so, life on the ranch continued, filled with work, laughter, quiet moments, and a deep sense of peace. The giant Apache woman had found her place in the world, and Thomas had found a companion whose courage, resilience, and spirit would forever inspire him. Together, they faced each day with gratitude, hope, and the knowledge that the past, though powerful, could no longer define their lives. The ranch was no longer just a place to live. It was a symbol of survival, trust, and the beauty of human connection, where fear had been replaced by freedom and courage.